Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Susan Trin from the Popular Marketing team. Thank you for tuning into our webinar, Reaching the Unreachable, Why It's Time to Connect with Your Hardest to Reach Employees. A couple of housekeeping notes first. We are currently on the Zoom platform, and you may use the Q&A panel on your console to enter questions, and then use the chat function for all other comments. We encourage you to engage with our speaker and each other throughout the conversation. We'll save time at the end to get to as many questions in the Q&A panel as possible. And yes, we will be sending out a recording to all attendees after the webinar. Now, I'm looking forward to today's discussion. Organizations continually face challenges in connecting with and engaging employees across all types of workforces. And an effective communication strategy is key to maximizing your reach, which is a core focus for Populo in supporting their partners and customers. So I want to tell you a little bit about your host. Populo is the leading communications and workplace experience software company. At Populo, we connect the people you need to reach with the right message across multiple channels like email, digital signage, mobile, internet, and more, all from a single platform. Populo's Harmony platform sets the standard in how technology can connect people, systems, and ways of working to deepen relationships and to help organizations move forward. Today, we serve over 6,000 customers across 80 countries, including nearly half of the Fortune 100, with enterprise-grade solutions that help employee and customer experience, optimize workplace management, improve operations, and drive measurable impact. Now on to the main feature, Ann Melinger, who is the CEO of Brilliant Inc. I'm excited to turn it over to her to introduce herself.
Thanks so much, Suze. I'm really happy to be here. And I also just want to thank all of you for sharing your time and attention with me today. I personally know how limited my own time and attention are these days. So I truly feel like you're giving me a gift, and I promise to make this time worthwhile. As Sue said, we will leave time at the end for questions. But before I dive in, I just want to take a moment to thank Populo for giving me this opportunity to talk with all of you today about a topic that is really near and dear to me. My company, Brilliant Inc., has been working with Populo for a number of years, and I'm just really happy to be coming together to talk about this subject. Brilliant Inc. It has been around since 2008, and throughout our existence, we have focused exclusively on internal communications and on improving employee experiences at every point around this employee life cycle. More specifically, we believe that every employee deserves a meaningful experience at work where they feel seen, heard, valued, and affirmed. And that is obviously quite relevant to the topic that we're going to be discussing today. Just a little bit about me personally. I live here in New York City. I am the proud parent of two amazing kids and one very precocious terrier named Molly, who will hopefully not be barking in the background. While many people have found their ways into this field of internal communications through PR or HR, I've actually spent my entire career here, the last 23 years working in internal communications. This is really my passion. You are my people. I'm so glad that people are weighing in the chat. Please continue to do so, because I am a speaker who loves to have an active chat. It's always hard just talking right into a camera. I'm fresh off of a number of live speaking engagements, which are so fun and energizing, seeing people's faces. So I can't see your faces, but I love seeing your comments pop up in the chat. And as we go along, I believe that we can really learn from each other on this subject. So I hope that you'll ask questions, share ideas. And one thing that I would like to ask you to do right now is share in the chat, what was your first deskless job? So my first deskless job was working at a children's clothing boutique. I had many others after that, restaurants, various other things, but I would love to hear about some of the deskless jobs that you've had. Oh, camp counselor, I was one of those too. Opening shift at McDonald's, waitress, Dairy Queen, that's awesome. Hostess, there's so many great. Oh, I see another Dairy Queen, that's awesome. So many great examples here. And I think this is really cool because there are hundreds of us on this call right now, and we're from all over the world. And there's not a lot of things that bring us together, but this is something that we can all connect to and relate to, is this experience of working as a deskless worker. So before we dive in, I want to do just a little bit of level setting about this topic. I'm not sure about you, but some of these statistics really blew me away, especially this first one. The population that we're talking about here, deskless workers, it is massive. 2.7 billion people worldwide with a B. But with such a large population that we're talking about, I think it's very easy to think of it as a faceless monolith. And so that's why I want to really spend some time talking about the characteristics and needs of this massive audience that, again, we can all relate to because we've all been a part of it at some point or another. And the challenges that we felt, whether we were working at Domino's Pizza or Aldo Shoes, hi Amy, we can see that those challenges that we felt in those moments are very different than the challenges that we may feel today, sitting at a desk. Here I am sitting at my desk, and it's very different than what I felt when I was standing in a store speaking face to face with customers. Now, here's the really frightening stat, and the reason why this discussion is so important for us to be having right now. More than 1/3 of this population is at risk of leaving their current job for a whole host of reasons. And this right here is why we need our organizations to really listen up and fight to keep these workers. This is a real crisis, and I don't think enough companies understand the magnitude of the crisis. I don't think I have to convince any of you of the tangible and intangible costs of that amount of turnover in such a short time, right? This 37% of 2.7 billion, I had to use a calculator for that, but that represents 999 million workers. That's a lot of workers. Which brings me to my third statistic, which is that the majority of deskless workers say they don't receive adequate communications from their employers. And I'm not naive enough to think that improved communications is like a magic wand and it's going to compel this 999 million worker group to stay at their jobs. But I do believe that we can make a difference. And I do believe that better communication can give workers a reason to stay. So before we switch gears to talk about how to improve their experience, let's talk a little more about why those 999 million deskless workers are considering leaving. The number one reason across several surveys is burnout. I know, I don't know about you, but when I see something like this and I see burnout, I just kind of like feel like I want to throw up my hands and say, what are we supposed to do about that? I feel it too. It's no surprise that they feel it. It makes me feel a little overwhelming and a little hopeless. So we'll come back to burnout and talk about that a little more. But here's another statistic that actually made me a little less panicky and hopeless than the burnout one, which is that 41% say that a key reason is not enough career advancement opportunity. So that does make me feel encouraged. This feels fixable to me. It's harder, perhaps, to provide deskless workers with the things that they want, but I do believe that it can be done. And I do believe that this is something that we can address. We may not be able to offer our deskless workers all the same kinds of flexibility that we can provide to a desked workforce, but it is absolutely critical that we consider it. They want more autonomy, they want more flexibility, and I do think that it's something that we have to think about. And if these statistics alone don't convince you, you can pick up the latest issue of Harvard Business Review. There's a huge feature right here all about engaging low-wage workers, most of whom are deskless. It's like a 20-page feature all about this topic. So clearly this needs to be on leadership's radar. So we're still talking about a faceless monolith of 2.7 billion workers. So I want to focus in on an actual human. This is Ryan. She is the daughter of a very dear friend of mine. She's 20 years old and she just landed her dream job working at Disney World. And she's thrilled to be there. But ever since she started working late last year, she's been taking on 16-hour shifts, 6 days a week, because Disney World is suffering from staff shortages, as many of you may be as well. She also has to deal with taking on tasks that maybe belong to other roles. She may be dealing with some pretty hostile visitors who are feeling like, well, I was so excited for a meet and greet with Mickey, and there's no Mickey because there's no staff. And that frustration just builds and often explodes on frontline workers like Ryan. Is it any wonder that she's feeling burned out by this job? Not just the hours alone, but the experience. And one thing to consider about Ryan, she is part of Gen Z. And Gen Z is at even greater risk of leaving their deskless jobs. The study that I shared earlier that found 37% of deskless workers are considering leaving their jobs within 6 months. That study found that the percentage was even higher among Gen Z workers, 48% to be exact. So let me just say that one more time. Nearly half of all Gen Z deskless workers are considering leaving their job in the next 6 months. This to me is a crisis. And let's not forget that many deskless workers who put their lives on the line during the worst of the pandemic are the same ones that are feeling this pinch right now. You know, we expected these workers to be on the front lines working with COVID patients or working in labs studying and producing life-saving medications or delivering and stocking and bringing necessities to people that we couldn't things that we couldn't get out and buy ourselves. You know, in the early weeks of the pandemic, I would open this window right here and clap at 7 p.m. for our healthcare workers. And now many of our healthcare workers are left looking and feeling like this. So I realize I've painted a pretty bleak picture here, but I know that all of you want to make a difference. After all, this is why we've chosen to work in the field of employee communications and engagement. And I really, truly, to my core, believe that you as communicators, we as internal communicators in particular, have what it takes to make a difference. We cannot fix everything. We cannot resolve every challenge, but we certainly can make a difference by elevating the need to engage deskless workers. We are not going to be discouraged by these barriers. Instead, we're going to advocate with them, advocate for them. We're going to demand a better experience for them, and we're going to take steps to engage them. So, engaging deskless workers comes with plenty of unique challenges. And so we're going to launch the first of two polls now because I'm curious to hear what some of you are finding are the greatest challenges in engaging your deskless workers. When we work with clients, these are some of the big reasons that we hear. Things like, I'm not really sure what they want. They're in a union, and that affects all the ways I'm able to communicate with them. They don't have a company email address. There are a lot of different reasons, and it's interesting to see which ones resonate most with you. So just closing out the poll here, let's take a look at the results. It seems like by far not having a company issued device is the top challenge that you're facing, followed closely by not having a company email address. I mean, that is the number one thing that we hear over and over, although there are plenty of other reasons that play into that as well. So back to our discussion, when you consider all of these potential roadblocks, all of the things that we just saw in that poll, we can't fix everything, but we can do something. So I'm going to walk through these 3 steps for engaging deskless workers. Again, please keep your questions coming along the way. This is really the heart of the discussion. And I want you to leave this webinar feeling equipped to build or enhance your strategy for improving deskless worker engagement. I mean, I think about all the time and energy that we collectively have spent over the last few years honing and refining our strategy for engaging remote workers and our hybrid communication strategies, we have to shift and talk about deskless workers. They deserve as much, if not more, attention right now for all the reasons that I've just shared. And some of this may not feel super groundbreaking. Some of you are already doing some of this. I love seeing the example here of providing staff with tablets. There are lots of ideas, and I want to ensure that we continue sharing them. But for this discussion, the 3 steps that we'll walk through include first, establishing a targeted listening strategy. From that, developing a personalized approach, and we'll talk about how to do that. And then finally, relying on some tried and true engagement strategies. So first, establishing a listening strategy tailored to the deskless worker experience. As we've already talked about at length, their experience is far different than the experience that many of us are accustomed to. So you can't simply copy and paste the approach that you're using for other employees. You have to understand what matters most to them, what channels they use, and taking that tailored approach is really key. So when our research team sits down to build an engagement and listening strategy for deskless workers, they often consider these 3 approaches. First being surveys, which are, of course, a great way to gather relevant data from your deskless employees. And they don't just have to be employee engagement surveys, they can also be communications preferences surveys. But you need to begin by carefully considering the sample size that you need to reach a representative portion of your deskless workforce. Deskless work environments typically do produce a lower response rate. So whatever you use globally is not necessarily going to apply here. You need to work that much harder to drive participation. Incentives can be really helpful. Sometimes something as simple as a pizza party for the department with the highest response rate can be enough to drastically improve participation. You can also use other incentives like everybody gather for snacks and enter your responses to this survey here in the break room. Those are some different ways to think about improving that response rate. Another way to encourage responses is to bring the tools needed right to the employees where they are. I see that some of you are having trouble with sound. I'm sorry about that. Looks like leaving and rejoining works. But again, we're recording all of this and hopefully you'll be able to follow and keep up. But I love that some of you are sharing some ideas about how you're increasing engagement with your surveys. Don't be afraid of paper and pencil. Don't be afraid to walk around with an iPad or give managers an iPad and have them walk around and actually say, hey, have a minute, fill this out. Make sure to also test your survey out on mobile devices, as we see these folks here doing. If you're going to have people taking them on a mobile device, don't spend all of your time building a beautiful survey and having it go really well on a computer environment and only to have it fail in the mobile experience. That is such a terrible way to lose respondents. And I want to just spend a moment emphasizing this last point on the slide here. This is a little bit of a soapbox for me, so humor me here, but you must be absolutely certain that any topic area that you're surveying your employees about is one that you're actually prepared to address, because there is nothing worse than asking for feedback, employees taking the time to share it, and then seeing that nothing changes. That experience is far more likely to breed disengagement than if you never asked for their feedback in the first place. So again, for anyone who's left and rejoined, I want to make sure I'm being absolutely clear. It is our job to make sure that any question we ask about an employee's experience is one that leadership is prepared to act on. Our research team, in fact, does not believe in survey fatigue. I think that there's actually just fatigue from people sharing their feedback and then nobody acting on it. So that is definitely something to keep in mind. The next way to really make sure that you're listening to your deskless workers, and to me, the best way, is through focus groups. There is no better way to truly understand their experience, to get into their shoes, than to sit down across from them face to face in their work environment. Throughout my career, I have memories of leading focus groups in warehouses, in transportation centers. I even sat in an air traffic control center and led focus groups. I also sat in a conference room in a hospital at 3 o'clock in the morning to do focus groups with nurses on the night shift. So it is just so important to make sure you're getting to where your people are. Um, Especially because organizations are often very reluctant to pull deskless workers from the front line. That is probably the number one barrier that we hear when we start this work. I can't possibly pull my people off the line. And that's why it's really important to vary when and how you do these listening sessions. Just a few tips to consider. We always say that you should focus on 10 to 12 participants in a focus group. Now, you want to probably invite more like 15 to 20 to account for day-to-day drop-off. If pulling groups together like that is just not possible for your organization, then consider doing smaller groups, maybe 2 to 3 employees at a time, pulled quickly into a break room during their line shifts. Sometimes these smaller, quicker discussions can work really well in a fast-paced environment like manufacturing or healthcare. Anybody want to guess the ideal number of focus groups to conduct within your organization? You can pop it in the chat if you have a guess. 8 is a really good guess. Our research team typically recommends no more than doing 5 to 8 focus groups for any organization, no matter how big or small you are. Once you get past about 8 groups, as Sarah suggested, you start to hear repetition. And so that's really just not a good use of your time. Another really important thing to consider is psychological safety. That is crucial when doing a focus group. To keep things really productive, a third-party facilitator is ideal. I'm not here to make a sales pitch, but hiring a facilitator like Brilliant Inc. to lead your focus groups is an investment that you won't regret, because without that, focus groups can very easily devolve into an unproductive airing of grievances. I'm sure we've all seen or heard or sat through one like that. And whatever you do, make sure that nobody from HR is in the room. Even if the focus groups are being hosted by HR or organized by HR, sure, you can have an HR representative introduce the third party facilitator and then leave the room. We want HR out of the room as quickly as possible. You also don't ever want to have managers in the same focus group as their employees. We always say do a separate manager focus group because they have different experiences anyway. So, and then of course, not to belabor the point that I made earlier, but again, you really need to make sure that if you're asking questions, you're prepared to address the feedback that you hear. And finally, intermittent touch points like focus groups and surveys can really help, but of course, it's really important that you have these ongoing feedback loops going all times. So many of you might have standing committees, I imagine, to give you feedback. Maybe you have a culture committee, but you need to make absolutely certain that you have a completely separate culture or communications committee made up of deskless workers. Maybe you did focus groups earlier in the year and you noticed some people in those groups who were really engaged, really enthusiastic, really interested. Pull some of them together and create that standing committee. It is so important, especially because as you're talking to people throughout the year, you're able to listen, iterate, improve, and that's just a much better, more agile approach to responding to the needs of your deskless workers. Pulse surveys are also great. We really like the approach of taking, a pulse of your deskless workforce once a quarter. Again, don't be afraid to use paper and pencil or quick feedback kiosks. If you're in a hospital environment or a factory environment, these kinds of kiosks are not super costly, but can make a really big difference. I still believe in the power of an old-fashioned suggestion box in the break room. It sounds simple, but it costs almost nothing, and it's a really great way to keep that finger on the pulse. And I would just love to hear if any of you have any strategies that you're using to gather feedback from your deskless workers on an ongoing basis. Any of you using Populo for that purpose? So Now that you have all of this, oh, there's a great one using a virtual suggestion box. I love that on the SharePoint page. Again, if you have data showing that your deskless workers are able to get there. So now that you have all of this feedback, what do you do with it? This is where we focus on building a very personalized plan for engaging your deskless workers. And the best way to do that is through the creation of personas. The reason why I like personas is because we all face a challenge that communications are often met, the internal communications are often met to apply to a global audience, right? You're all sitting at your desk every day writing communications for a global audience. And they often become watered down because they're trying to be everything to everyone. And using a persona can actually help you get into the headspace of that particular someone that you're trying to engage. And personas are something that we've been preaching at Brilliant Inc. for many, many years, especially working with Populo and other technology platforms, which give us as communicators such rich and targeted data about the population segments that we're talking to. So Brilliant Inc. has a whole workbook on developing personas. I'm not going to go through every step involved. You can access it at this link, or you can just use your phone right now to snap that QR code and pull up the guide to use later. But the workbook goes step by step. Here's how to build and use personas for your deskless workers. But just a few reasons why I think this can be such a powerful tool in engaging your deskless workers. If you think back to that faceless monolith that I referred to earlier, the 2.7 billion workers, right? Our challenge is, how do we communicate in a way that's going to resonate with those people? You must focus in on particular someone in mind. You have to think about their experience to make sure that it's relevant, because when you try talking to everybody, you run a real risk of talking to nobody and your communications falling flat. So to get started with building a persona and to get started with honing in on that specific someone, we always start by thinking about the makeup of our company. What are those key segments among deskless workers? Those can vary wildly. I'm imagining they vary wildly among all of you. So, just start by asking yourself, if I were to say, divide your deskless workforce into thirds. What are some of the groups that you'd put your people into? And you can share that in the chat. Maybe you have groups of deskless workers based on location or function, maybe based on where they work, like retail centers or delivery vehicles or distribution centers. If you're in the world of pharma, maybe your deskless workers are manufacturing, lab, and field sales. In healthcare, those of you working in hospitals, maybe it's physicians, nurses, and medical support staff. I'd love to hear what segments exist for all of you. It's basically like, close your eyes and see what segments of your populations emerge. Dispatch, drivers, retail, supply, warehousing, commercial sales. I mean, right there, you can see that what we do for somebody that's working in warehousing is going to be completely different for something that we do for somebody that is in sales, and completely different for somebody that's working in a home care environment versus working at a desk. So it's so important that we make sure we're thinking about these different segments. Once you have these segments in hand, you can really start to hone in on, okay, what are the different things that I need to know about these audiences? What are their needs and priorities? Partner with HRIS. Refer back to some of the insights that you gathered in your research to really dig into the needs and preferences of these individuals. How many are there? Where are they? What is their tenure? Don't make assumptions as you're starting to build your personas. So a rule of thumb that we also say is, thinking about those segments, you're going to want a persona for each one. So for example, looking at manufacturing, supply, and transportation, the segments that Karen shared in the chat, Karen, you would want to have a persona for each one of those three segments. Megan might actually have 4 personas for frontline staff, branches, and volunteers, and another one for general employees. So you're going to use all of this information and all of these insights to start to inform the creation of your personas, one for each key segment. And back to this definition that I shared earlier, when I talk about personas, I really like to emphasize two key points. First is that although your personas should be fictional, as I've been saying all along, they must be grounded in your actual data. Don't just jot down your ideas or your assumptions. Make sure you're using all of that data that you gathered in step one, right? The focus groups, the ongoing feedback loops, the surveys, to really populate what you know about these personas. And second, remember that they're individual characters that are meant to represent a larger audience. They are meant to help you understand who you're talking to and help you picture them so that you can really help to influence their level of engagement. It really goes back to that what's in it for me question. And just a few other tips with personas. We always say that your personas should have faces and names. I don't like seeing personas that are stick figures or cartoon characters. I want to see either real employee photos or use stock photos to bring your personas to life. Remember to use diverse and inclusive images, that you're not, again, just defaulting to some specific idea in your mind. Because even though these personas are fictional, you need to be able to feel like you could walk down the hall, or get on a Zoom and actually talk to a person, talk to this persona. We like to bring them to life with quotes, communications preferences. And then if you see over here on the right, this little panel with the calendar, I don't want you to overlook that, because that is a really great way to think about how to target your communications to your different personas. It's to actually walk through a day in their life. Consider, what does their day-to-day experience look like? What is their commute? Where are they during their working hours? Do they have meetings? Are they using their phone to complete tasks related to their jobs? One really strong advantage to building realistic personas is that they give you that sense of empathy. They give you that name and face and motivations to this otherwise very abstract bundle of characteristics. So once you have your personas in mind, you can really start to build a tailored and targeted communication strategy using the language and the topics that are going to resonate most. You want to think about the channel preferences for each one of these different personas and adjust accordingly. For example, maybe you have one persona for your lab workers, represented here by Benjamin, and you know that Benjamin is a particularly heads down persona, and he only wants to look up for news that is directly relevant to him in his role. And then you have someone like Lauren who wants to see everything, right? She represents your manufacturing population and she likes to have the ability to skim through it all. And so therefore, you might think about in your new popular newsletter, for example, how are you using icons and subheads that make sure that someone like Benjamin can just skim and see what's most important to him, whereas someone like Lauren can see everything and pull out what she wants to see. Or maybe go back into your old newsletters and see, is there content here that's relevant to Benjamin? Are there people here that look and sound like Lauren? Is she seeing people that she can relate to in the communications? That is something that is really important. Whoops. So moving on to our third and final step in crafting a deskless worker communication strategy, don't try to reinvent the wheel. Okay. Instead, look around. There are lots of great tried and true best practices for engaging deskless workers. And I see in the chat, you're continuing to share some of the challenges that you have. And I would love if we can start to share some of the ideas and solutions, as we start talking through some of these best practices. So these are the 4 best practices that I'm going to spend a bit of time talking through. The first being going beyond operational communication. So very often when we talk about communicating with deskless workers, we're very much talking about operational communications. We're thinking about production targets. We're thinking about safety statistics or other need to know data points. But it is so important that we think beyond operational communications. Too often, deskless workers are left out of conversations about mission, vision, values, even though they're often the ones who are delivering on those promises directly to the populations that our company serves. So as you're crafting your campaigns, think about how can you emphasize and reinforce your deskless segments larger value to the organization. There are so many beautiful examples of hospitals like this one that are engaging their workers who don't sit at a desk every day, but using them to share stories, using them to highlight their experiences and celebrate their expenses. Celebrate their successes. So again, any examples of storytelling that you all see in your organizations, would love to hear those here. And specifically when you're thinking about storytelling, remember what I said earlier, that career advancement is super important to this audience. And it's not something that is typically seen in the ways that we communicate with them. So back to that study earlier that I shared that said 37% of deskless workers are considering leaving in 6 months. Across the board, across all geographies, as you can see here, the top reason across the board is career advancement. And so this is something that we can do. We can partner with HR. We can work with HR to uncover what are some of those career growth opportunities that are going to appeal to our personas. Let's go back to our personas and think about what are their hopes and dreams? What's some of the training and career development skills that they want that we can provide to them? So it's not only about sharing stories of individuals who have climbed the ladder and have worked their way up through various deskless roles, but also highlighting some of the specific programs and opportunities that are relevant to them. If we think back to Ryan, who I was talking about earlier, she started working at Disney World just late last year, and she's already being tapped for leadership development program. And so seeing the opportunities in front of her can build her tolerance and improve her feelings of burnout when she's working those very long shifts. So we can't fix everything that has to do with burnout, but sometimes by emphasizing the reason why they're at work, the opportunities that they have, and the difference that they're making in the organization can really help to counterbalance that feeling of burnout. Another key best practice is focusing on activating your managers. And I want to be very emphatic with this one. I'm even going to sit up and get closer to the camera to make sure that you're all hearing it, because without exception, managers are the number one most effective way to reach deskless workers. I am a true consultant to my core. I don't often make pronouncements like that. I often say it depends. But in this case, managers are the number one most reliable and effective way to reach your deskless workers. And if you're going to be tapping into your managers, you have to give them the tools that they need to do so. So that often means crafting manager specific training about the importance of communicating with deskless workers. It means emphasizing the role that they play in improving their experience. All of the things that I said to you earlier about this population, everything I did to emphasize to you the emotional responsibility that you as communicators have, you need to convey that same emotional responsibility to managers. They really are the ones who can make a difference in employees' productivity, in their retention, in their well-being. And so consider manager-specific tools, consider ways to empower them to deliver those messages in the touch points they're already having, right? So for those of you that are in hospitals, I'm sure you have huddles that are happening. Give managers things that they can just plug right into their huddles and use to communicate. And yes, BJ makes an excellent point. It needs accountability. This is like my number one soapbox issue. The number one best way to make sure managers are doing this is to tie it into their competencies, their performance reviews, and most importantly, their compensation. I believe so strongly in compensating managers based on the effectiveness of how they're improving their people's experiences. I would love to hear if others have great examples of that. A lot of companies rely on a cascade One pharma company that we work with has this very specific cascade strategy in place for getting information out to field teams. They start at the top with a call to, the most senior leaders who then are trained on the messages that they cascade down an hour later, that is then cascaded down an hour later to make sure that it's really getting to those frontline people. So a cascade can be a really effective, although not flawless, way to do that. And I'd love to hear if others have any other ways for tapping into managers. And the last point that I want to make here is making sure that you're using multiple diverse channels to reinforce messages. So again, use your personas and think about the channels that reach them the best. This is all about where people are working. What is the flow of their day? What is the opportunity for touch points? Do they clock in somewhere in the morning? Do they stand at an elevator to get to where they're going? And is there a digital screen at that elevator? If your audience is on the go, like a field sales rep, then maybe a podcast is a really great way to deliver content for them. When I think about this, I think about that old adage that you have to hear a message 7 times before it resonates into your mind. I believe that with an on-the-go workforce, it's probably more like 10 times. So you really have to think about all the different ways that you can tap into all the different channels to reiterate messages over and over for your deskless workers. And to do that, you have to make sure you're keeping your messages clear, succinct, that you're cutting out the things that are not important, and reiterating those messages over and over. I love bathroom stall installs. Thank you, Valerie. That is a really good one. I always think about that when I go to a bathroom that has that. It's great. It's there. You're a captive audience. Posting a newsletter on a physical bulletin board, absolutely, Chris. That's a great idea, and it's definitely something that can be effective because, as I said, you want to make sure you're reinforcing it. You're hoping that they're reviewing the newsletter online, but in case they're not, there it is. And maybe they'll stand and skim it, or maybe it'll just at least be a visual reminder for them to go back and check later online. Another great thing to think about is look at the data as to what people are actually opening, right? I just heard a talk from a hospital that found that physicians were most likely to open emails that came from other physicians. That insight right there is a great way for you as communicators to engage with physicians as a channel for you to reach your people. So it's really about digging into those needs, preferences, and then reiterating and reinforcing as often as possible. So we are coming to the end of our time together, and I do want to leave plenty of time for questions. So really get those ready. But before I do that, I have to give this is my classic pep talk for any of you who've heard me speak before. It's something that we say inside Brilliant Inc. when we call out each other doing great things. We say, damn, you're good. And that's what I just want to say to all of you in closing, because this is a huge problem. It can be very overwhelming, but I really do believe that as internal communicators, you are the ones to help companies get this right. You have the skills and the expertise to do it. You have the drive to do it. And I'm hoping that you have what you need to be the advocates for deskless workers inside your organizations. It is a group of employees who've been neglected for far, far too long, and engaging them can make a really meaningful impact, not only on the individual people like Ryan or the exhausted nurses or the hardworking shift workers, but you can also make a really meaningful impact on the business overall. You can make a difference. So before we move into our Q&A, I'm just going to turn it back over to you, Suze, for a second poll, but please, everybody, get your questions ready because we do have about 15 minutes to talk through some of those.
Yes, thank you so much, Ann. Like, damn, you're good. So before we go to Q&A, just want to throw out a quick poll. If any of what has been discussed today resonated with you and you want to dig into it more and see how Populo's platform can help you engage your hard to reach employees, we'd love to connect you with our team. So we'll just take, 10, 15 seconds here just to capture that.
And while we have this up, Suze, I'll just answer one of the first questions that I saw about sending email from your personal email or over a resource account like Corporate Communicator, which you might have if you're using Populo. And the answer is my classic consultant answer, which is it depends. And that's why looking at the data is so important. Look at what works, try different things, do some A/B testing, send one out from one email and another one from another, and see what works the best, because that's a great way to really make sure you're using the right channels.
Awesome. All right, we can close out this. And go over to questions. So again, if you have any questions, please type them in. And I've been taking notes of some that have been going on throughout the presentation, which has been great. So we might be jumping back a little bit. First one is, I didn't get a name on this, but they work for a major transportation provider with 20 plus locations. We want to know how to reach our bus drivers and mechanics who do not have desk and don't even check their work emails. Would love some ideas. And that's a question, which I'm
Yeah,
sure
it's a great question. It is very challenging. I have seen some companies that have done this and have done it well. And it's really about getting out and talking to those employees and understanding what is it that they're experiencing day to day. I have seen trucking companies that have large trucking populations do storytelling campaigns, which can be a really beautiful way to connect the people that are sitting at the desks with those people. I don't know about you, but I want to see and hear, what are they experiencing on a day-to-day basis? I want to hear their stories. Encourage them to pull out their iPhones and share what they're seeing and feeling. And sometimes that can really help, that by getting some of those stories going, you're communicating to them, look, we care, we want to engage with you. You are part of this audience. And that in and of itself can start to encourage more engagement with some of the communications that you're doing. Helping people see and feel that they are important can really make a difference.
Awesome.
Another one, Suze, that I saw in the Q&A is, what advice would you give to internal communications teams working in a culture where client experience is clearly more important than employee experience? Unfortunately, that is really all too common. It is something that it's just the reality. It's also the reality of our industry that we faced all along. I think we all know that marketing gets bigger budgets than we do. And that's because, to some extent, customers are considered to be more important than employees. But if you need further proof, the data is in these studies that I shared with you. Go get the Harvard Business Review. Put this in front of your leaders who are doubting the importance of engaging these workers. Really start to build that business case that if that many deskless workers were to leave at one time, think about the strain on our supply chain, on everyone else's experience, and on overall productivity. That is something that is just super important to consider.
Thank you, Ann.
Somebody else shared that, one, hard to reach employees are air traffic controllers who don't have work computers. I have to say, Nikki, one of my favorite and most memorable experiences, if that question came from Nikki, not sure, but one of my most memorable experiences in my career was actually doing a communications audit for the Federal Aviation Administration. It is so challenging, but so important. It can take hours and hours and tons of effort to get a focus group with folks like that organized, but you have to do it because it's the only way that you can truly understand what they are living and breathing on a daily basis and be able to tailor communications that are going to work with them. You have to start by sitting with them and understanding what they have, and then make sure that you're reaching them in the best way possible. And I see your comment, Melissa, which is also a really common one. Somebody who is in a manufacturing environment may feel like, look, I don't want to hear and see fluff. I don't care about it. And again, whenever I hear things like that, I put on my research hat and I just start to get curious. I want to understand more about that. What is fluff to you? Is fluff that we have added a new flavor of coffee in the lunchroom, or is fluff talking about the real patients that benefit at the end of the line for the medications that you're producing here in this factory? What do you consider to be fluff? And really understand what they want to hear, because I guarantee some of what you feel will make a difference in their experience is what they want to hear. And so getting out there, talking to them, sitting on the manufacturing floor and understanding that is really important. And then making sure that you're being super strict on only filtering for that information. The reason why employees say I don't want to hear anything else is because they've been inundated with information that they don't consider to be useful. And so you have to really make sure that you're refining and honing and making those messages really tight, and only choosing the most important and most meaningful topics to pull them away from the work that they're doing. Other questions that you're seeing, Suze? I'm scrolling through the chat, but I want to make sure I'm not missing any.
Yeah, one is a bit more prescriptive of, Anne, what do you consider a good open rate on such things as email newsletters? Any ideas on how to boost them?
It's another one that I will give the most hated answer, which is it depends. But it really does. I mean, in a deskless environment, a 40% open rate can be mind-blowingly positive. I hear open rates of 80 to 90% in desk environments. So it really depends. And that is why we love using tools like Populo, where you can really dig into, okay, it's not just about the open rate. It's about when did I send it? Who did it come from? What was the subject line? Making sure that you're playing with different subject lines, playing with different, maybe an icon in the subject line really helps. Does an emoji help? Does an exclamation mark help? And really making sure that you're testing and trying different things before just assuming, our people don't like emails. You really have to make sure that you're looking at, get a baseline, look at what it is today, then start doing some A/B testing, play with different things, and focus more on the improvement over time. I want to see more that you improved from a 20% open rate to a 40% open rate versus actually looking at what your open rate is in that moment in time.
There was another, I know a question just came in, but there was another question about, they aren't allowed to have access physically to team leads on the floor, and they want to gather feedback. How you talked a lot about empowering, people managers on the line. Any tips on the verbiage in order to motivate them to get that type of information from deskless workers?
Yeah, it is. It's tricky, and depending on the specific makeup of your, whatever your work environment is, actually getting things into the hands of managers and getting managers in front of workers is more difficult than I may be making it sound. And I recognize that it's different for every organization, but this is where we as communicators have to be those advocates. That's why I really want us to think about and spend so much time thinking about those individual people and the experience that they're having day to day, because we are going to have to fight for the resources, the time, the leaders to make this a priority, right? We have to say, look, we are at risk of losing a huge swath of our workforce. One key way to do this is to empower our managers. That means fundamentally changing the way that managers are measured on a daily basis. That means fundamentally changing the way we communicate, adding a new channel. You have to be prepared to make that case. And be able to really compel leadership to consider it. And so that's why building up that sense of advocacy is so important. I think it's the only way that you can really fight for it. To Chris's question, I know we're down to only our last about 5 minutes here, but to Chris's question about, we only have 2 people for internal communications. Should we publish different versions of our newsletter? I say absolutely. I mean, again, if I think about the experience for somebody sitting in a headquarter versus somebody sitting on driving a bus, it is so vastly different. Now, you may be you're clearly under resourced with only 2 people. Serving a population of 11,000. But what you can think about perhaps is having different sections of your newsletter, certain sections that are relevant to everyone, and then sections that are relevant only to certain populations. And again, using things like color coding and icons to really help make that happen. Brilliant Ink has some resources on our website around how to target newsletters and other communications channels for different populations through visual cues and things like that. I'm leaving this slide up so you can access some of our resources. Our website is really just filled with things, tools, templates to help you at no cost, because it's so important to us to be able to empower you to do this work. And also, of course, feel free to schedule time to talk to us more, because these are not questions that we can easily solve in an hour, unfortunately.
Thanks, Anne. I think maybe we could get to 1 or 2 more. I think Jamie had a good follow-up question to your response before about empowering, managers. Is it, what's the best way to make the case for going direct to deskless workers? Can we do focus groups with them versus the leaders of them?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, you are trying to make the case to do something that a lot of people just automatically are like, nope, not going to do it. We're never pulling our frontline workers off the line. We will never do it for any reason. I have been told that more times than I can count by more companies than I can count. And we just have to keep pushing and saying, look, we're talking about give us 3 groups of 10. Okay, give us 3 groups of 10 people. That's 30 people that we're going to pull off the line. Give us 45 minutes with those people, and we are going to be able to get insights that can impact the influence on so many people and their experience, and we can help prevent that massive exodus of workers that the data is telling us that we're going to see. So, really, yes, you should host focus groups with leaders and deskless workers separately. You do definitely want to try to push for that. It's low cost, but it's so important. Fancy design of a newsletter boosting readership. Again, our website has tons of resources on this about how to turn your newsletter into something beautiful. It can help boost readership, but more importantly, it can help employees skim to make sure that you are getting the materials that you need. And I know that we're coming up on time, Leslie. I see your question and I don't want to ignore it. We actually just recently had a discussion and a webinar all about how to make a business case, led by our research team. So if you message me on LinkedIn, I will send that to you because it's really helpful that if you are feeling inspired and you want to get out and make a case for building up your internal communications team and adding headcount, I can share that resource with you. It's really helpful.
Thank you so much, Anne. I think we are approaching our last minute. If you have any parting words before we sign off,
I just wanna thank Populo again for giving me this platform, this opportunity to talk about such an important topic. And the closing thoughts that I'll leave you with is just remembering, damn, you're good at making a difference in these individual employees' lives. This is why we do what we do, and we really can make a difference. So Thank you again, and have a great rest of your day or evening, depending on where you are.
Yes. Thank you so much, Anne. We appreciate you sharing your insights here with everyone. And thank you to the audience for tuning in. And we hope to see you on the next one. Goodbye, everyone.